Part 1.
Listen to a talk to new students at a university. Then answer questions 1 to 3.
Hi, it's good to see you all here today. And what a pity the weather is so bad for your first day at university. It could at least have stayed sunny today. Now, my name is Pat Baker. I work for Student Services and I'm going to tell you all about our mentoring scheme for new students. We've had it in place for a few years now, and people starting at university for the first time in general find it a very positive experience at these meetings. What happens is this. Each of you, if you want to, that is, will be assigned a mentor. That is, someone who's been studying here for a year or two and who can show you the ropes. In other words, show you how things work, give you advice if you need it, and just generally be a friendly contact for you in the university. Of course, you'll have your tutors and lecturers who will also help you with academic problems, but this is someone more your own age who has been through the same experience quite recently. What the mentor does is have a group of usually 2 or 3 students, and he or she organises meetings, preferably about once every 2 weeks. We generally find that more than that's just too often, where you chat about your problems, university life, or just about things in general, and your mentor will give you the benefit of his or her experience. If you're joining this scheme, you'll be meeting your mentor today, just after lunch. If you haven't signed up, by the way, it's not too late. Come and see me after the talk. Don't be frightened about this first meeting. It's going to be quite short, so you won't have time to tell your mentor all your difficulties. You'll just get to know each other a little bit and, most importantly, fix a time and a place for your next meeting, which you can have when you're feeling more relaxed and not so overwhelmed by the newness of it all.
Before the talk continues, you have some time to look at questions 4 to 10.
Mentors, as I've said, have been through the same experience as you quite recently, so they can understand your problems. They'll be able to tell you about academic systems, which are so different at university from what you were used to at school. Also, because at university you are much more independent and you have to spend so much time studying on your own, they can suggest techniques for studying, which will help you to keep up to date with your work. This university is an enormous place, so another thing which they'll be able to help with is university facilities. You know, anything from sports halls to libraries to medical services, and they can probably help you get involved in all sorts of social activities too. Parties, clubs, sports, whatever. So, as you can see, this is a pretty useful scheme, but it does rely on people keeping in touch. The telephone's pretty useful if you have one, but students are busy people and often out doing things, so email is probably better. Your mentor will be able to show you how to get an email account. They don't cost anything to students. They're free. For people who have never been away from home before, a mentor is a useful contact and support, somewhere between a friend and a parent. And no doubt as the year progresses and you start getting nervous around exam time, your mentor will be ready with useful tips on the best way to pass your exams. After all, they did the same ones either last year or the year before, and they passed them.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2. Part 2.
You will hear a conversation between a student and an accommodation officer.
First, look at questions 11 to 14. Listen carefully.
Well, you have left things a bit late. Have you tried looking for somewhere in Newbridge?
Newbridge? No, I haven't. I've never heard of Newbridge.
Well, let me show you. I've got a map here. Here's where everything is. You come into Newbridge over the bridge, and the main road in front of you is, surprisingly enough, the High Street. This is one of the main streets. And branching off to the left, you can see there, is West Street. That is another busy part of town.
I see.
Now, as I was saying, here is the High Street, and here is West Street going left. Now, if you go along West Street, the first place you come to on your right is the supermarket. It's not a very big one, but it's got most things you're likely to need. Next to it, there's the Old Town Hall. I say the Old Town Hall because it is about 100 years old, but it will soon make way for a car park, I'm afraid. I suppose the car is king. Now, opposite the supermarket is the railway station. You can get very frequent buses and trains from here into the university. And next to that is the sports centre. It's a brand new one and was built on the site of some tennis courts. So that's progress. It's got everything the keen sportsman like yourself might require. Now, that's the centre of town, and I want to point out to you the buildings opposite the supermarket, but on the other side of London Road. There are two buildings there. The one further away from the High Street is called the Heights, and the one nearer the High Street is called the Towers.
What are they?
They are where you could find a flat. One of them, the Heights, has a number of flats for rent at the moment.
Oh, good.
Look at questions 15 to 20. You will now listen to the second part of the talk.
Now, the first one is flat 4. That's a nice flat with a balcony, and you need to apply to the Newbridge Accommodation Agency to ask about that one. You'll find their number in the phone book. Number 6 is another nice one which has been empty for a while, and you can ring the owner directly, I think. Yes, I've got her number written here. There it is.
Right, thank you.
Good. Now, number 8 is a re-advertisement.
What do you mean?
Well, it did have a tenant, but now it is for rent again, so I'd like to ask about that one. Leave it with me and I'll look into it for you. Then we can talk about it when I've got more information.
OK. Are there others in this block?
Yes, there's number 10. Now, this one's a bit strange. It's advertised with an agency as well as privately in the local paper. Normally, if it's advertised through an agency, you shouldn't really go behind the agency and go directly to the owner. But on this occasion, I suggest you just answer the advert here in the newspaper, which the owner has obviously put in.
OK.
Finally, there is number 14. This is with the New Start agency. This is an agency started by the girl who was my assistant here, and she left to make money for herself, so she's not my favourite person. But I'm afraid I would have to advise you to go through the agency anyway. Again, their number is in the phone book. All right, is that something for you to be starting with?
That's great. But what kind of place is Newbridge?
It's a nice place. It was developed about 100 years ago, really for people who worked in the factories around there. They were clothing factories and everyone worked in them, men, women, boys and girls. Then, when the factories closed down, things got very difficult for the town. There was a huge amount of unemployment until a few years ago when, in the telecoms boom, a company making mobile phones started up. I think your phone was made in Newbridge. And now this company employs most of the people in the town. There are new housing estates on the edge of the town, but they're mostly occupied by young families, and there isn't much student accommodation there. Most flats and so on are in the centre.
That sounds good.
Well, let me know how you get on.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3. Part 3.
You'll hear a conversation between Astrid and Henry about the lecture they've just heard.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Henry, don't you think Dr. Adams' lecture was really very good? He could talk about the telephone directory and make it interesting.
All his lectures are like that, Astrid. He's just one of those people. I wish we had him as our tutor.
I bet you that he is very demanding, though. Boris is in his tutorial group and agrees that he is brilliant, but he puts them under a lot of pressure.
But don't you think that's good?
Perhaps. Anyway, he's interesting and rather funny.
Did you take lots of notes in the lecture?
Yes, actually I did. In fact, several pages. I didn't think I had taken so many.
I was that busy listening to what was being said that I didn't take many notes. Can I photocopy yours?
I don't think that's such a good idea. You won't be able to read my handwriting. And sometimes I write them in English and sometimes in Arabic.
Oh, let's have a look. Wow, your notes are so neat. Well, there's not much in Arabic.
There is on this page.
Yes, there is. Dr. Adams would be pleased to see this, especially given what he's talking about.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Don't you keep careful notes?
Sometimes. It depends on the lecture. I don't think I'll forget Adams's lecture today, but some of the details will fade.
I type up everything afterwards, so you can have a copy then, and you can fill in anything I've missed. I'm not so good on the broader concepts. I'm better when it comes to detail.
Just what Adams was talking about.
Well, I am definitely a detail person. I need to have everything written down before I can get the concepts clear in my head.
And I am the complete opposite. I find all the detail clutters up my mind, and I get very frustrated, which was just what he was on about. He mentioned a book he had written.
He mentioned several.
The one on space and the individual.
Yes, called My Space. It's on the book list.
So it is. I think I'll get that out of the library, or get my own copy.
Did you get what he said about spatial awareness? I didn't really.
Yes, it was fascinating. I can't be as eloquent as Adams was, but I know several people who are frighteningly intelligent, but they have difficulty reading simple directions, even when getting to places that they know very well.
I find that difficult to understand. Everyone learns the way to walk to the shops and things like that.
You mean just the way people learn spelling? You know, people misspell words, make mistakes in countless areas of their lives, and going in the right direction is just the same. Remember what Adam said about the number of people who cannot tell left from right, north from south, and so on? Do you know which way is north?
It's that way.
You see, I couldn't have told you that.
Really?
I haven't a clue which way is which. That's why I'm always getting lost when I go out on my bike. And put me in a completely new place and I am totally lost.
What about maps?
Oh, I'm hopeless at reading them.
But then you're brilliant at writing essays and getting all the ideas down in the right order, and I don't know where to start.
Again, just what Adams was talking about. What we need to do is combine our skills. You teach me to cope with detail, and I'll teach you how to string concepts together.
Okay, we can do that.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
Today I'm going to talk about my end-of-year project.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning. Today I'm going to talk about my end-of-year project. I wanted to find out why men and women tend to perform at different levels in particular sports. Let me start by explaining why I chose this subject. Now, as some of you may know, I'm an enthusiastic long-distance runner myself, but I have never felt particularly worried about the fact that I usually finish several minutes behind my male counterparts. How it all started was when a first-year student approached me because he'd read an article about why women swimmers never compete successfully with men and wondered if I could look into the issue in regard to running. My tutor confirmed that a lot of interesting research had been done on this issue, and also I knew that whatever I found out was likely to be useful in training programs I run at a local girls' school. So, I started doing some preliminary reading, and what I found out was a mixture of the expected and the unexpected. It didn't come as all that much of a surprise to learn that male runners have more muscle and women more fat. and this accounts for most of the difference in sports performance between men and women. This is normally caused by differences in hormones. A male hormone, testosterone, builds muscle, whereas a female hormone, estrogen, causes fat to accumulate. Of course, this was something that we learnt about very early on in sports science. But then I began reading about the nature of muscle, and this is where I found something that did surprise me. Men and women have exactly the same type of muscle fibres, which means that they are capable of fuel burning at the same rate. I was also reading some very interesting research on differences between the average height of men and women. We all know, of course, that men are much taller on average than women, but what this means is that women actually work much harder because they have to take a lot more strides to cover the same distance. I hadn't understood that before I read this research. So, I set up my own small-scale research project to investigate some of these points and a few others. I asked for men and women volunteers from the University Running Club, and I timed their speed in a race. Then I worked out proportions by dividing a person's running time by their height. And what I found was that by this measure, men were only slightly ahead of the women. For my second experiment, I put weights on the men's shoulders, so that the men and women would have the same height-to-weight ratio. I found that under these conditions, the women actually ran faster than the men. In my last experiment, I decided to look at what is called elasticity, by measuring how high the men and women could jump. And I found that my male and female participants had equal levels of jump power.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.